Hi, I'm Hannah Jamal, and for my ISU assignment, I wanted to learn about and go into what Canadians can learn from Indigenous peoples and communities. In order to fully understand the country that we live in, it is crucial that we listen and pay attention to the many different Canadian perspectives that there are, an important one surely being the original caretakers of this land. Three compelling and influential Indigenous texts are Letter to a Young Indigenous Journalist, an article written by Wabgashig Rice, Footprints in the Snow, a poem written by Nicola Betzel, and my ISU novel selection, Son of a Trickster, written by Eden Robinson. In Letter to a Young Indigenous Journalist, Wabgashig Rice writes about how he has faced racism as a Canadian journalist, and how important it is for young Indigenous journalists and all Indigenous youth to use their voices and speak about the harsh realities of Canada. Footprints in the Snow is about how culture and tradition is passed down from generation to generation. Nicola Betzel writes about harmonizing with Canadian land and all living things, and taking pride in her Indigenous heritage. Son of a Trickster is about Jared, an Indigenous teenager who deals with drug abuse and alcoholism and a complicated home life. Yet he is a very compassionate and understanding young boy. His father is absent from his life, and he hardly has any connections with his mother's side of the family, meaning that he knows very little about his family's spiritual and cultural past. He has always marveled at the fact that his maternal grandmother has said that he wasn't human, and that he was, quote-unquote, the son of a trickster. He thought nothing of it, that is, until animals started speaking to him, and other inexplicable things were happening around him. I decided to analyze these three Canadian texts because they all centered around Indigenous experiences. I felt that this would be a great foundation to answer our essential question of this course. How do the texts that we read help us to understand the country that we live in and our place in it? I believe that the texts that we read help us understand the country that we live in by revealing harsh truths about this land that we may have been unaware of. We read to learn about aspects of our country from different Canadian perspectives. Our place in our country is to recognize these truths, learn from them, and work together so as to not repeat them. My three main takeaways and things I learned about while reading these texts were 1. The incredible respect that Indigenous people have for the earth and all living things. 2. The importance of their culture and traditions and how sacred this is. And 3. The struggles they have faced, especially in regards to racism and misrepresentation. Quote, "Some cultures imagine our world is on the back of a turtle, which you would think is not literal. But our universe rides a creature so strange, we don't have the senses to detect it or the math to explain it. Maybe we do live in a layer of mud on the back of a giant, multi-dimensional turtle." Unquote. Robinson, 193. This passage from Son of a Trickster discusses the Indigenous creation story. This story is in Native folklore, and it tells the story of a turtle that holds the world on its back, called Turtle Island. In many origin stories, the turtle is a symbol of life, and Turtle Island is a meaningful story to many Indigenous peoples. The turtle is also a mark of identity, spirituality, and a deep connection and respect for the earth. What fellow Canadians can take away from this is that we should deeply care for the land we call home and treat the earth with respect, just as the Indigenous peoples have, in order to preserve it. Quote, "Proud to acknowledge who I am, yet flexible enough to adjust to the songs of others, I attempt to walk with peace and balance within my stride, as my son picks up what I leave behind." Unquote. Betzel 2. Continuing traditions and passing down knowledge of spirituality is deeply important to Indigenous peoples, as this is how culture is preserved. In her poem, Betzel expresses that passing her culture and traditions to her son is like leaving footprints in the snow that her son will follow behind in. Passing down culture also encourages Indigenous youth to take pride in their identity, especially when older generations are proud of who they are. Just as Betzel tries to walk with peace and balance, Canadians alike can learn from this and practice the same thing in order to work together to reach reconciliation. Quote, "Racists will thrive on diminishing you and your stories in attempts to uphold white supremacy. The hateful words will come at you almost daily because they don't want you there, helping people like you speak their truth and shattering the illusion of a benevolent Canada." Unquote. Race 2. A very important step in ultimately reaching reconciliation is ceasing the misrepresentation of and racism towards Indigenous peoples. From Canada's dark and shameful colonial history of restricting cultural practices to today's missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, Indigenous peoples have faced discrimination, marginalization, and violence for far too long. Rice elaborates on his experiences as an Indigenous journalist and how he faced discrimination in his workplace. He discusses how he was told to make his stories more suitable for white audiences by softening Canada's colonial history, and how the ignorance of many colleagues forced him to work twice as hard just to be respected in his own workplace. In order to eliminate these behaviors and ideals, Canadians of all backgrounds and faiths must encourage Indigenous peoples to share their stories and speak up without hiding any details so as to soothe white audiences. It is our job collectively to amplify their voices and to listen to what they have to say, rather than speak for them. Indigenous peoples deserve the utmost respect, fair treatment, and recognition, especially for how they care for this earth and the beauty of their culture. Canadians must educate themselves and become much more aware of the systemic racism that exists in our country. We must work hard together to dismantle this. In reading Canadian texts, specifically Indigenous perspectives, we enhance our knowledge and observe the good and the bad aspects of Canada. It is what we do with this information that is extremely important. We must collaborate to achieve greatness and not repeat past mistakes. We must work together to learn more about each other and respect and embrace cultural diversity in order to make Canada a better, more inclusive place. Thank you.